Cecilia Wadenschow, looking at spoken language interpreters in her work Interpreting as Interaction, along with other research, has talked about the crucial place of interpreters not as the middle person or the arbiter of communication, but actually being a part of the interaction. Cynthia Roy's work, starting with even before, but interpreting as a discourse process, recognized that what interpreters are doing are not merely feeding information back and forth, but are contributing, that is, constructing the discourse with the other participants. And more recently, Daniel Claude Bélanger from Montreal has talked about interactional patterns in dialogue interpreting. And again, the words can be misleading. We're talking about dialogue because there are two participants, but the interpreter is still crucially a third participant. So let's take a look at what Bélanger has talked about. So as opposed to either the interpreter in the middle diagram or the typical triangular diagram, what Bélanger says is the actual interaction, not only the meaning, but the interaction is co-constructed by the two participants along with the interpreter. And that's a crucial point, that the interpreter is there present, allowing the interaction to happen. And according to Bélanger's model, there are various ways that the participants and the interpreters can interact, but they are all co-constructing and contributing to this single interaction together. Now, once Peter and I looked at this, we said, well, what is it that what is making this problematic? We've had researchers like Wadenschow, like Roy, like Bélanger talking about this, but we still haven't had a concept of role that's been promulgated that actually recognizes both the important place of the interpreter, but how they need to be enacting the role of interpreter. So what I'd like to do is just show you a quote from one of our works and then talk about the model that we are proposing. Fits all, and that's obviously very clear. The other idea that's been problematic because of the idea of role as entity is that people talk about stepping out of role. Well, interpreters can act inappropriately, even unethically and illegally, but they are still functioning as interpreters. Just like if during a medical interview, a doctor is asked a personal question about their vacation, for example. They don't step out of role to answer that. They're still the doctor in that interaction. So what Peter and I tried to do is it said, well, we don't want it to be a free-for-all. We still think there needs to be constraints upon what interpreters do, but how can we define those constraints? Well, first of all, we need professionals, interpreters with integrity, and I think that that's probably non-controversial. But how else do we model interpreting in such a way that we can constrain it so the interpreter is not using power that's not theirs, but can contribute to the most successful interaction for the participants with which they're working? So since roles, again, are not something that we have, they are not entities to be had, or they're not cloaks to be taken on and off, that they are something we enact through our behaviors, we are proposing the concept that we're calling role space. And I'll talk about the details of that in a second. But the idea of role space is it's dynamic, it changes during the interaction, it's situational, it's affected and sometimes constrained by the individual language situation, but crucially, it's also negotiable with and amongst the participants. And it recognizes the central role the interpreter has in co-constructing meaning and interaction with, but not for, the other participants. So what I'd like to do now is we'll talk about the three axes, the three-dimensional axes of the model, and then we'll look graphically at it and give you some examples.